Hello everyone and welcome back to my Warhammer 40k guides. I am Brady from Almost Pro Gaming, and today I have an old favorite for you guys, and that is the top 10 armies of November 2020. So if you're a longtime fan of the channel, you'll remember that in the before times, during the long ago, I used to have a series of these videos where I talk about the top army placements of tournaments each month and showed off the army lists. I stopped making those videos for most of the year because, well, tournaments completely stopped for about half of the year, but with tournaments back on the rise, at least until the next lockdown, it's time to get back to the flagship series of the channel, which is the top 10 armies of each month. So for those of you who are new to the channel, how these rankings work is that I look at the top 4 placings of all grand tournament and major events that took place during a certain month, this time being the month of November. And whichever armies had the most top 4 placings get a higher placement on the list. The placings those armies had at each event as well are the tiebreakers if multiple armies had the same amount of top 4 placings. And that's pretty much all you need to know to understand how this ranking works, so let's not waste any time and let's just jump right into it, because I know I've really missed doing this series, so I'm sure a lot of you have missed this series as well. Number 10. Death Guard. The army that has clearly won the year of 2020 outside of game comes in number 10 this month with a single second place finish, and here's the list. So this list makes use of the Plague Company Poxmongers for that incredibly strong 4+ invulnerable save that you can give to your demon engines. And this list brings 9 demon engines. The Blight Haulers move decently fast with their 10-inch movement, so they can move up the board pretty quickly while having the Demon Prince run up behind them while providing that 4-up invul since it is an aura. They also only have 8 wounds each, which means that they don't degrade if they do take damage, but they are pretty durable because they come with a 5-up Feel No Pain, again that 4-up invul that we just talked about, and a 3+ armor. You also have ways to heal them as well because of the spell that this player takes on the Great Unclean One. And with all the buffs to vehicles in 9th edition, you no longer have to worry about these guys getting tied up in close combat and becoming useless. They can still shoot a missile launcher and a couple of melt-a-shots into their combat alongside their normal melee attacks, so they're actually pretty decent now. They are also -1 to hit in close combat as well, and with the meta being mainly close combat armies, these guys can be disgustingly resilient. Their damage potential isn't massive, but this list isn't trying to table the opponent. I assume this player played more of a board control centric game where he just survived on as many objectives as possible and did damage where needed to push the opponent off of other objectives. And that's pretty much it. Just a durable army that can be very good at holding objectives while doing just enough damage to get by. Number 9. Orcs. The Orcs with a K because of copyright reasons come in 9th this month with a single first place finish, and here's the list. So it's a classic variation of the Green Tide list. 89 boys in total, with support from a big mech who gives them a 5-up invul when using a stratagem to increase the bubble range, also including a war boss and Ghazghkull who also work as great beat sticks, but also support the boys with the different auras that they have. They have a few commandos for some deep strike shenanigans, which will help kick units off of backfield objectives early on, since it would take about half the game for the boys to get up to those objectives anyways. They also have some mega knobs for the same purpose, a pain boy to give all of the boys a 6-up Feel No Pain to make them even more durable, on top of that 5-up invulnerable save aura, and also the Pain Boy can heal Ghazghkull. They got some mech guns to deal with threats that the boys and characters can't get to, a weird boy for teleportation shenanigans, and some Gretchen to just sit on a backfield objective. So this list is essentially the classic way to play Orcs. Lots of boys to take over objectives and break some heads, some good stratagems for the boys like being able to make them attack twice, bringing a whole unit back from the dead, and many others. Ghazghkull is also incredibly strong as well, since he can only take so many wounds a turn, and then you heal him up with the Pain Boy, so he can be incredibly hard to deal with, especially for some armies. The old way to play this style of list was Evil Sons, but with the addition of Ghazghkull to the model range, Goths seems to be the preference of most Orc players that want to play the Green Tide still. You also have the option of getting Strength 5 boys if you really wanted to, so if the meta does end up changing to have more Toughness 5 stuff in it, then I believe this list will still be pretty decent because that's an option as well. And yeah, I definitely like this list. It's a lot better than the old meta that we used to see towards the end of 8th edition, which was basically just spamming a bunch of smasher guns. Number 8. Dark Angels and Adeptus Custodes. We have a tie this month between Totally Not Chaos and the Golden Girls. Both factions had a 2nd place finish and a 3rd place finish during the month of November. So let's start with the Dark Angels. So the 2nd place Dark Angels list makes use of the broken ATV Apothecary combo. This is where, rules as written, the Apothecary can revive an ATV for free and at full wounds. It's kind of dumb, and although not super OP broken, I still think it's pretty broken and an oversight by Games Workshop's rules team. And looking at the rest of the list, to be honest, most of this doesn't really stand out to me all that much. In fact, I kind of don't like this list at all personally, but there could just be something that I'm missing since I'm not super familiar with Dark Angels, or the person that played this list was just incredibly good and just had a solid game plan going into every game. Moving on to the next Dark Angels list, it features a ton of Deathwing stuff, which make great use of the new Inner Circle ability that basically gives them all free transhuman physiology. So you can only ever wound that stuff on wound rolls of 4+, which makes them incredibly durable. This player also opted to bring a Chief Apothecary for those incredible heals and revives, which keep the Terminators alive much longer than they naturally should. Azrael also gives them a 4-up invul, making them even more durable. Overall, just a really great unit, especially with the buffs to the Inner Circle. I definitely like this list a lot more than the last one based on my own preferences, so if I were to play Dark Angels myself, I'd probably play this one. Moving on to the Custodes, the third place list features a couple of shield captains, 3 guard squads with mostly spears, a unit of Sagittarum, a unit of Venatari, and an Ares gunship. This is another list that I don't really like because I'm not a fan of putting all your eggs into one basket, and this list is pretty much the definition of that. If the opponent manages to kill most of the ground force, then it's a pretty easy win since that gunship isn't going to be holding any objectives. So I feel like this list relies on the opponent trying to overcommit into killing the dropship instead of just focusing on everything else and winning the game on points. And personally, I don't really like banking on that. And for the second Custodes list, this is something that fits my personal preference a lot more. It's Trajan and a shield captain, a unit of 5 guard with shields, a unit of 4 guard with shields, a unit of 4 guard with spears, 4 Alaris, some Sisters of Silence, prosecutors, a Vexillus Praetor, and some jet bikes. So I like this list a lot better because it doesn't have all its eggs in one basket. Everything here can provide decent damage on its own, and the 2 main guard squads are incredibly durable with their 1+ reserved armor and 3-up invuls from the new Storm Shield rules. Great units for taking control of the center of the board and then being able to move out from there to be where they need to be. There's also some really cool tricks, like being able to have the Alaris snipe characters, same thing with the Sisters of Silence. And with the new Shadow Keepers that this list seems to be using, they have some very good stratagems that make all their stuff even more durable. So this type of army can be incredibly hard to remove, which makes it very good because they can just sit on objectives and win the game off of that. Overall, I'm happy to see Custodes doing very well this edition, especially with actual Custodes units instead of what we had in 8th edition, which was just Imperial soup with some Custodes vehicles shoved in. Number 7, Adeptus Mechanicus. The Robot Boys come in 7th this month with 2 top 4 placings, a 1st place list and a 4th place list. The 1st place list features a ton of breachers, which are pretty decent to camp objectives with due to their long range, multiple wounds, and decent saves. It also features a big blob of Electro Priests that can become surprisingly durable with a 3-up invul and hit surprisingly hard in close combat, especially with stratagem support. When it comes to the rest of the list though, it's a bunch of the new units that I haven't really looked into all that much, and I haven't had the chance to play against either because, well, COVID, and I honestly don't really know that many AdMech players to begin with. So sorry to AdMech players, but I don't really have much insight on that first list. As for the next list though, it's definitely something that I have a bit more knowledge on because it's closer to the classic AdMech that we used to see before all of those new releases. It features Call for the full-on rerolls, a Daedalus and Engineer for more support, some Rangers and Vanguards as the basic troops for objectives, more hard-hitting Electro Priests, some Iron Striders which are great for secondaries like Engage on All Fronts because they have a stratagem that allows them to advance more quickly, but they also can provide some decent shooting as well if that's needed. The list also has some Castellan robots which can just shit out a ton of damage and mortal wounds with some stratagem combos, some Dune Crawlers for the long range shooting, and some Dune Riders to transport the Electro Priest and the Vanguards. And of course, a few units that again, I haven't really had the chance to play against yet. I assume all the vehicles, except for the transports, chill with Call for the rerolls while just pumping out damage, and the rest of the list I assume more or less runs around the board, grabbing objectives or getting secondaries like Engage on All Fronts. Overall, a pretty solid list, and it's good to see the Robot Boys back in top 10. Speaking of Robot Boys, number 6, Necrons. The murder robots come in 6th this month with 2 second place finishes. With the new updated codex, Necrons are looking to finally be a good army now without the need of the Doom 6 from 8th edition. Warriors seem to be back in business. With the new reanimation protocols, they can be deceptively hard to kill, and with them being 1 wound models, the Warriors reanimation protocols work like a better version of a Feel No Pain, because even if they die to multi-damage weapons, they only need to make that 1 reanimate roll to come back. With that said, reanimation is nerfed on multi-wound models, but that just means we finally get to see more warriors on the table again. The Silent King also makes his debut in a top list. That model is incredibly strong, especially when he gets into melee, where is where he wants to be. He has a page full of rules, more than I'd like to go over in this video, but just know that you never ever want to get near this model unless you want to get murdered 15 times over. The best way I've found to deal with him is through shooting, but even then he does have a 4-up invulnerable save, and his 2 shield things that he comes with can absorb a decent amount of damage for him. He's also under 18 wounds and not Titanic, so he can still make use of the obscuring rule while also having the fly keyword, so he can bounce around behind terrain pieces to be able to get up the board safely, and then eventually get up in the opponent's face and just smack him. Scarab Swarms are looking incredibly popular as well. They are like the Necron version of Nurglings if you want to think of them that way. With the Sizarakaga, I can't pronounce that word. With that specific dynasty though, they have objective secured, which makes them great for holding objectives with the amount of models that you can bring. They're also surprisingly durable as well, kind of like Nurglings. So yeah, great unit overall. So overall, so far Necrons are looking pretty good, and I think they're going to stay in the top meta armies for a while. Number 5. Genestealer Cults. The Spacebug Men come in 5th this month with 2 top 4 placings, with those placings being a 1st place finish and a 2nd place finish. To be honest, I'm surprised by this because I thought the faction was pretty much dead, but I guess I was wrong on that. I still don't think the army is top tier by any means, but they are probably better than I gave them credit for in my last tier list video. They are still a very toolbox type army, which means they usually have an answer for everything, one being piloted by a skilled player that knows how to make use of those tools. The army is definitely very glass cannon like though, so it does take an incredibly skilled player to make them work. So kudos to these guys for bringing Genestealer Cult into the top armies of November. I'm looking forward to how they do in future months. Number 4. Chaos Demons. The faction whose name accurately describes what my ex-girlfriend was like comes in number 4 this month with 2 1st place finishes. The first list is a list I went over in another video. I actually interviewed the creator of the list, TJ Lanigan, and he goes over his thoughts on his list and why he built it the way he did. But basically, to summarize it, he brought 2 big, super durable monsters that are capable of dumping out a ton of mortal wounds, alongside some other characters who also dump out a ton of mortal wounds, and then a bunch of chaff to protect all of those characters and grab objectives. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that, but since I already have a video on it, I figured if you want to know more, you can go watch that video. I'll have a link for it in the description of this video, and there should also be a card in the top right corner of the screen right now to send you there as well if you didn't feel like finishing this video for some reason. And the second Chaos Demon list is Keeper of Secret Spam. This list wants to run at the opponent and keep them in their deployment zone for as long as possible. The Keepers are stupidly fast and can usually make a turn 1 charge based off of their advance rolls that they get, since they can advance and charge. The Fiends are also very fast as well, although not as fast as the Keepers, but when they do get into melee combat, the enemy units cannot leave combat, which makes them incredibly strong against shooting armies. And the Demonettes are really just in the list just to hold backfield objectives while the rest of the list runs up and murders the opponent, or at least keeps the opponent occupied long enough that the demon player wins on points for holding more objectives. Number 3. Sisters of Battle. The Nuns with Guns come in 3rd this month with 3 top 4 placings during November. They were all 4th place finishes, but it's still good enough to get them this spot on the list. So here's the first Sisters list. As you can see, it's pretty standard for the most part, except that the chosen order is Bloody Rose. Normally in past Sisters lists that I've seen, there's a Battalion of Valorous Heart and then a Vanguard or Outrider of Bloody Rose, but this player opted to just go with full-on Bloody Rose. I think they wanted to make this list a bit more punchy overall, because with the Imagifier boosting the girls up to strength 4, and with all the benefits they get from Bloody Rose and St. Catherine, they can actually smack as hard as regular Space Marines in the fight phase. I think it takes away a little bit of the durability when not running Valorous Heart, but depending on how you play, you could still definitely make it work. Plus the Celestians and the Seraphim really benefit from Bloody Rose as well. Also, look at all those multi-meltas. That melta buff that happened not too long ago definitely shows, as we're now seeing Retributor squads being spammed with nothing but meltas. I've played a few games against similar lists with my Space Marines, and oh boy do those Retributors hit hard. They got 8 shots apiece between all of the meltas, and then when you get rid of the 2 cherubs that they can bring, that's another 4 shots on top of that, at least for that turn. So each Retributor squad shoots out 12 melta shots a turn. That is ridiculous. People were complaining about Eradicators, but completely forgot about Retributors. They also don't suffer any penalties for moving and shooting because of an ability they come with, and yeah, overall they're just a very solid unit now. And then also when you combine Miracle Dice in it as well, if they really need that 6 damage, they're gonna get it. Moving on to the next list, this player opted for the Order of Our Martyred Lady for the main detachment, with of course more Retributors with Meltas, and then a second detachment of Bloody Rose with more Celestians like the last list, but this time including some Repentia who also hit like trucks, some Zephyrim, and some Mortifiers, which we haven't really seen all that much until now. The third list is somewhat close to the second list, except this player opted for a bunch more Mortifiers. I've always liked that unit for a while. They get a decent amount of shots and are pretty good in close combat as well, so I've always been kind of surprised that they never saw play. But it does look like some people finally caught on to how much damage those units can do, especially with the heavy bolter buffs, so I assume we'll see a lot more of them in the future. Number 2. Harlequins. The evil clowns from outer space come in second this month, with 4 top 4 placings during the month of November. In my most recent tier list, I kind of undervalued these guys a little bit, but they are definitely a top tier army at the moment. They're incredibly fast, surprisingly durable, and hit like trucks, especially against elite armies, which as you can see take up a huge chunk of the meta right now. It doesn't really get shown in this top 10 video, but I believe the last time I looked up the stats for it, Space Marines were taking up I believe it's like 70% of the meta or something like that. Like Space Marines are still incredibly popular, and Harlequins are very good against Space Marines. Harlequins also come with a good amount of attacks as well to help deal with hordes and non-elite armies. So they're really just a great army all around. As for the lists themselves, they all look very, very similar to each other because, well, Harlequins only have like 10 units in total, with half of those being characters, so they are stuck with a limited amount of units in the first place. It's really the only meta army in the game that doesn't have too many variations, which is a good thing. I'm glad about all the diversity that we're seeing with all these armies in the top 10. But for Harlequins, it's not really their fault that they're not too diverse because, yeah, they don't really have all that many options. Overall, a very solid army though, and I'm looking forward to how they continue to do in the future. And before we hop into the number 1 army of this month, let's give some honorable mentions. So these armies had at least 1 top 4 placing during November, but their placing wasn't high enough to get them on the list. So this month we have 2 Space Marine chapters, Black Templars and White Scars. So here's the Black Templars, or budget White Scars army as I like to call it. It really does look like a White Scars army except for Halbrecht, and personally I actually think this army would do better as White Scars if you just took out Halbrecht and made a couple of minor changes, but obviously it's still good enough as Black Templars to still be able to win. As for the White Scars list, it's similar to the Black Templars list, but drops the Terminators in favor for more units, probably to help with holding objectives and getting other secondaries. And so now, let's get into the top army of November. Number 1, Ultramarines. The Smurfs had 5 top 4 placings during the month of November. A couple of these lists are from the same player, and he opted to actually soup up with Space Wolves to provide a bit of more punching power with some Wolfguard with a Lightning Claw and Storm Shield. Speaking of which, it's great to see more Firstborn Marines in competitive lists again. For a long time, it was really only Grav Devs that we saw in competitive lists that weren't Primaris, but Vanguard Vets and other similar units are starting to see a lot of play now and actually doing well. That extra wound that they gave to all Firstborn to bring them in line with Primaris definitely helped, especially because Firstborn have more weapon options than Primaris do, so they're way more versatile. Anyways, back on topic. So some of these lists include Gilliman, who is still a beast in close combat, and a great character for providing reroll support. There's also some more Chief Apothecaries because they are so incredibly good, probably one of the best units in the Codex in my opinion, just because of you usually always get your points back with him every game, if not more. Grav Devastators are still a thing, even after the nerfs, which shows how incredibly strong they were before the nerfs, and Ultramarines as a chapter is still great as well. Their Doctrine bonus is still incredibly good for infantry with heavy weapons or even rapid fire weapons, so that you're always getting max shots and never hurting your own ballistic skill when moving. Their stratagem to redeploy 3 units is still incredibly strong as well. It allows you to bait out opponents into having a bad deployment because they have to counter your deployment, but then you just switch it up on them when the game actually begins. It's incredibly strong when used correctly. There's definitely a lot more to it than that, and Ultramarines definitely have a bunch of tricks up their sleeve, but it's more than I would like to go over in this video, so I think I'll leave it at that for now. And anyways, that's going to be it for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more Warhammer 40k content like this. Also, if you're a fan of the channel and you enjoy the content I make, if you haven't already, I'd like to ask you to consider making a pledge to the channel over on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can get access to the Almost Pro Gaming Discord server, where you can chat with myself and over 100 other patrons about Warhammer 40k and get help with list building or even tactics or other sorts of advice. It's a great resource for new players, but definitely helpful to veterans as well. So it's a great way to give back to the channel while getting something back in return for yourself. So if you want to check that out, I'll have a link to the Patreon page in the description. With that said, thanks to all my current patrons. You guys and gals are awesome, and I honestly can't thank you all enough. And thanks to all you regular viewers as well for watching the video. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next one. Happy wargaming.